Hi guys, my name's Caitlin. I'm a holistic nutrition consultant and I'm the author of a blog called grassfedgirl.com. Today we're so excited. We have Sherry from the Nutrisense company. She's going to be talking about the CGM that I wore for 2 weeks and what results I had and what it could do for you. So please stay tuned all the way to the end to hear all of her tips and tricks. Welcome, Sherry. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Hi, Caitlin. Thank you so much for having me on your show. It's great to be here. So I am one of the RDs at Nutrisense. And basically, as an RD, we are paired with each member that wears a CGM. And basically, our goal is to help whoever uses our program to reach their full health potential. So we use the CGM, the data that it provides, to interpret and give insight on your diet, your exercise, your stress, and your sleep, all things that impact glucose and all things that can impact.
That's awesome. I really enjoyed wearing it. So tell people what a CGM is, just in case they don't know.
Yes, so a CGM stands for a continuous glucose monitor, and it's basically a small device that you wear on the back of your arm, and you scan it at least every 8 hours. That'd be 3 times a day, and data continually comes in, and so you can see how your glucose is impacted by, we call it the 4 pillars of glucose. So diet, stress, exercise, and sleep. And it really gives you a good insight and a good indication of where you are on the metabolic health spectrum. And so that's why it's so important, I think, in my personal opinion, that everyone gets a chance to wear a CGM if they would like to.
So what happens if somebody just has no idea what's going on with their blood sugar, and what can happen if over time they don't pay any attention to it? What is the impact of that over many years?
That's a great question. So, if you think about our metabolic health, and you think about something as in like a disease state such as type 2 diabetes, CGMs are often associated with diabetes because it historically was used in the only in the diabetic community. If you think about in the terms of that, metabolic health is a spectrum. So you can be anywhere from extremely metabolically healthy, very insulin sensitive, to a place where you have maybe full-blown type 2 diabetes. So understanding where your glucose is at, it gives you a good idea of where you lie on that spectrum. Research has found that about 93% of non-diabetics actually reach levels that would be considered dangerous and abnormal. And this is missed in traditional labs. If you think about the labs that most people get annually, it would be a fasting glucose value and maybe in some cases an HbA1c, right? So, but majority of people only have a fasting glucose value. And that value really only shows what is happening at that one point in time. I like to use the analogy that a fasting glucose value is a pitcher versus a CGM is watching a full movie, right? So you can see with the fasting glucose that, hey, maybe my value was in the low hundreds this morning, but we don't understand from that value, you don't understand why it's in the low hundreds. You don't understand what's impacting it. And so it doesn't really give you a good full picture of where you are in terms of understanding your glucose trends. And yes, you are correct that if uh, blood glucose goes unchecked for long periods of time and you have elevated values for long periods of time, it does can progressively get worse, and you can, not to scare anyone, but eventually, yes, if it continues to be high and no interventions are taken, people can progress to develop prediabetes, diabetes, etc.
So I see my parents, fasting glucose once a year. This is just in the morning, and it's always like 100 to 105. And it's like, so their doctors just tell them every year they're fine. And it's like, I know that that's not fine and that they should be more worried about it. But because their doctors don't say anything, then they just think everything's cool.
Yes, and I think to your point, there's a difference between optimal values and maybe like average and normal, just because normal doesn't necessarily mean optimal, right? So we do like to see those fasting glucose values between 70 and 90. And when they're a little bit elevated, there could be many reasons for it. It could be poor sleep. It could be that we just need to tweak maybe their meal timing. But ignoring it definitely does not help, get anybody's values into an optimal level where we're trying to reach. We want everyone to be in an optimal health state, right? So if we're just saying, oh, a lot of people have that value, it's okay. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's a value that we necessarily want.
Well, don't they group the unhealthy people in with the healthy people and then it makes the range like wider or something?
Yes, exactly. There's a lot of nuances with lab values, but if you think of, your HbA1c value, which is the metric that's used to diagnose prediabetes and diabetes, you know, a point of a percent means all of a sudden that you're diabetic. That's not the case, right? If you are at like a 5.7, or you're 5.6, just because you're a point percent away of that diabetic range, that doesn't mean that insulin resistance is not going on. Insulin resistance has been going on for years. But
Yes.
for some reason, when we go above that 0.1%, all of a sudden we have diabetes. And so I think that's kind of one of the big issues, is that we're just catching it too late. And so the CGM provides that preventative tool, really.
It's great. And why do people think, I mean, so if you get it from your company, you have like in-house doctors there that provide the prescription? Is that how it works?
Yeah, that's a great yeah, that's a great question. So in the United States, you do need a prescription to get a CGM. We take care of that for you. We do that by filling out. Every member has to fill out a health questionnaire. So it's just basic information, so we know that you are eligible to get their prescription. And we do have a panel of doctors and we have our health team that reviews it, and we do have a board of health doctors that are on that support our company and stuff and things like that. But we do have a health team that reviews all of the health questionnaires in depth, so we know that we're not just giving out CGMs freely, and that it's appropriately used. There's the criteria for it isn't huge. You just need to be over 18. You cannot be actively taking insulin medication, you cannot be actively pregnant, and you cannot be receiving any type of chemotherapy or any type of cancer treatment. So the criteria, when you think about it, that really anyone um, can receive a CGM outside of those parameters.
That's great because it wasn't like that a few years ago.
Yes, we're hoping we would love to make this more accessible for everyone to get, so that everyone can have an idea of what their glucose is doing.
Now, and with some of the trends, do you see, I'm sure you've seen a lot of labs of people who are following low carb diets or keto diets or carnivore diets. Do you see any commonalities with those people?
Yeah, that's a good question. Everyone's glucose is a little bit different. As I mentioned, not only diet and exercise impact glucose, but stress and sleep and hormones do as well. So, um, you know, assuming that everyone taking those variables out of the picture, typically, yes, with carnivore diets, any very low carb diets, we see a similar trend where glucose variability, which is the glucose swings, is very low. So glucose is pretty stable throughout the day, which is what we like to see. That doesn't mean no variability, right? Glucose will always ebb and flow, because it's impacted by so many different things. But in general, if you're following a low carb diet, you do see a lower variability. In some instances, if people have been following a low carb diet for a prolonged amount of time, usually I want to say anywhere between 1 and 3 years, we can sometimes, not in everyone, will see higher fasting glucose values, and that necessarily isn't a bad thing. It's just an adaptive thing where your certain organs need glucose. It's its preferred energy source. And so the body is just making that. And so sometimes we'll just see some elevated values. But in general, according, based on the research and based on what we're seeing, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something to be aware of. And then in that case, if that is happening for someone, we usually try to work with them to incorporate some form of carb as tolerated and to their preference.
Okay. Um, so when you follow, were you able to see my results?
I did, yes. I took a look at your data, and just as we discussed, very low variability, which is great. So it looks super stable throughout the day. I did notice an interesting trend where it looks like maybe around mid morning to afternoon, it looked like there was some sort of glucose dip. And I was actually curious to see how you felt during the day, how your energy levels were, and if you noticed any subjective feelings.
Yeah, I mean, it was very low. I mean, my results were like 55 a lot of the time, which is
Hmm.
so weird because I feel totally fine. I mean, I am breastfeeding and I am up a lot in the night, so I don't know if that makes any difference, but during the day I feel fine. Of course, sleep is always I'm always wishing I had more, but I don't know what's going on. Why it was so low, but I don't feel because I used to eat when I was younger in college and everything. I ate a very high carb diet. And so I used to get hypoglycemia all the time. I would get like, shaky. I would start crying. Like if you had
Mm.
went to a restaurant and there was like an hour wait, I would like freak out, or something because I was
Yeah.
I didn't have any reserves because I was doing low calorie, low fat. There was nothing. So when I hit the wall, there was nothing there. I had to carry like a that's why this is so interesting to me because I had to carry like a granola bar in my purse because I would like literally crash, and burn.
Yeah.
But I don't feel, but so I know what that feels like, and I don't feel that
Yeah.
at all now. And don't even feel hungry. I just eat because I like to eat. Yeah. I mean, I would feel hungry if I waited longer, but I just kind of eat maybe twice a day usually, but it's more just because it just kind of fits in with the schedule or, you want to eat before you go out or something like that. Like, but I'm never like voraciously hungry like it used to be. So I don't know what it is. And I'd be interested to try it again when I was getting more sleep and stopping breastfeeding and when my baby is older and then I could see maybe some different values.
In different patterns. Yes, that's really, really interesting. So a couple of thoughts there. Typically when people are eating a high protein, high fat diet, that's protein and fat are both very satiating. So it's very common for people to say, I don't feel as hungry. And so it's great that your energy levels are super stable throughout the day. Postpartum and in general, there's a lot of hormones going around, especially with breastfeeding. I totally relate to you. I also wore a CGM while I was breastfeeding, and it was interesting to compare my glucose patterns from when I was breastfeeding versus when I wasn't. So if you get a chance, it would be interesting to see. Some women do experience some lower values when they are breastfeeding, and so usually we recommend if you're feeling fine. Typically, I'm not too worried about it. It's usually when people are symptomatic, and it sounds like you know what those crashes feel like. So you're aware of that, which is key. So not too worried about it, the low values, unless you're symptomatic. But yeah, if you ever have a chance to wear one without, when you're past the postpartum phase, then it would be interesting to see.
That would be really cool. And I just want everybody to know like the device is totally painless. Like you just basically stick it on the back of your arm and I didn't even notice it. I forgot about it completely. Like, but then your phone reminds you have an app that works with your phone. And so your phone will remind you every 8 hours or um, it seems like I would put it in the morning and then in the evening and maybe
Mhm.
one more time. And it gets all your data. You just like put it up against it. But I had trouble. You had to make sure, like, you have to turn your phone this way and then put it like that, because I had the first couple of days I had a hard time getting it to work because I was like, it wasn't
Yeah.
right on the
Hmm.
right spot on the phone to calibrate or whatever. So, but the support is really great because I was telling them what's my problem, and they were like, oh, you just don't have it on quite right. And they sent me a video. I mean, I had the thing on right. Thankfully, I didn't have to take it off or anything. So don't do that. Just put it on there and just, tell them, what's, can you help me? Don't start fooling around with your CGM. And like literally you feel nothing. And I think for somebody, like, I know my stepmom, for example, is very afraid of needles, and she would just, I've told her a million times, you need to take your blood glucose throughout the day, and she would totally freak out and be like, hell no, I'm not doing that. And so this would be a much better option, because I bet once she put it on, she wouldn't even remember that it was on there, because that's what happened to me. And uh, the other thing about that is that, yeah, I just wish everybody could do this, because it's just so fascinating. And I know what I was going to say about the pregnancy, when so many people think they have to drink that sugary drink. And, what I did was, I wish I had had the CGM then, but I did just tell them, you're in charge. You can say no. And I said, I'm just going to monitor my blood sugar all, like, after every meal or something. I said like 4 times a day. And I did. And that showed me some really interesting um, data. And, and I think you get to know yourself a lot better when you're doing that, rather than when uh, you're doing that glucose drink. So I recommend everybody do something like this or like that with the monitor while they're pregnant, instead of drinking the sugar drink, because it's going to tell you so much more about how you're doing, and preventing gestational diabetes, right?
Yeah, gestational diabetes. Yes. And so, yeah, that is the main reason why an oral glucose tolerance test is done. As you mentioned, it's to see the risk of, or if a woman has developed gestational diabetes. Um, and I do agree that CGMs in general provide a lot more insight on the reason why, your glucose is responding to a certain variable. So it's definitely a lot better than pricking your finger. If anyone out there does do that, if you test multiple times a day, um, I can say that for myself that I definitely prefer wearing a CGM. It's painless versus pricking my finger a couple of times a day. Um, if that's an available option for you. For some individuals, they do need to check their glucose through a meter. So yeah, if you're able to, it's definitely a great option to share more in, or to gain more insight on your body.
It's I hope it, like you said, it becomes more and more available and more affordable, because I think that it could help so many people avoid outcomes of, metabolic syndrome over the years. So what do you wish people, what are some of the misconceptions or the things that people think on when you're talking to them about the CGMs? Like, what are some of their fears? Or
Yes, that's a good question. So I think a lot of people think that CGMs are only for diabetics. I think that's one of the main misconceptions. And so explaining to them that everyone can gain some great insight on their health, their metabolic health, is always the first step. And so hopefully we've done that here so far. I think the next misconception is, as you touched on, is that it's really painful to insert. When you get the device, it does look a little intimidating at first, but it really is painless to place. And as you mentioned, oftentimes people do forget that they're even wearing it. And so those are probably the two biggest barriers when people are nervous to try it. And in general, any type of wearable device that tracks your health is interesting and novel and maybe a little bit scary, but really we like to, I don't, our director of nutrition, Kara, always refers to as glucose being the next vital sign or being like a vital sign, similar to blood pressure. You want to track your blood pressure to see how you're doing. It's a good indicator of how you're doing with your cardiovascular health. Similar with glucose, you want to understand those trends to see where we lie. So if you think of it like that, it's like a vital sign, which it is, because it rises and falls with different variables and different things. And so it's very interesting. You'll gain a lot. I promise you'll gain a lot of insight once you try it.
What is the range you want to see during the day of the highest and lowest?
Great question. So as I mentioned, for people who do follow a carnivore or low carb diet, this will likely be a little bit different. But in general, for fasting, there's three primary trends that we do track. So for fasting glucose values, as we touched on, we like to see those. We like to see those values between 70 and 90, but anywhere between 70 and 140 is the normal range. With 140 over, if you eat a meal and your glucose spikes over 140, as I mentioned, that would be a glucose spike. And so not necessarily a bad thing. We just like to make sure that it's all about repetition, right? We don't want glucose to repeatedly spike over 140. But that range between 70 and 140 throughout the day is good. We like to see average glucose below 105. So when you look at your data, obviously your average glucose was well below 105, which is great. And you're feeling good energy. And so these are all good signs. These are all things that we take into consideration. We like to pair the data with the subjective feelings, because that's really what tells us what's going on with the body. You can't have one without the other. You need both.
That's so important, as I'm a thyroid patient, so they that is so important to put both of those, because so many
Yes.
people get messed up with that
Hmm.
from their doctors. And then how fast should you go back down? Like after you have let's say you had a Subway sandwich or something, and then it went up to and a Snickers or something, it went up to 140. And then how fast should you see that back down to 105?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we like to see after meal values return back to baseline or wherever you were at before you ate your meal between 2 to 3 hours. So people often ask well, what if I didn't spike over the 3 hour mark? Just because similarly to a high glucose spike, if your glucose values are elevated for a long time, it's still taking your body a lot of work. It's still taking a lot of insulin for glucose values for insulin to be pumped out for your body to bring down those values back to baseline. So 2 to 3 hours is a good range
Okay.
for.
But if you're over 140 a lot of the time, like that's pretty scary, right?
It's if you're repeatedly going over 140, there's definitely things and interventions that the RD will probably discuss with the member. There's a lot of different factors that go into it. Obviously, if you're eating, Skittles, that can be expected. If you're eating something like apple with, a small piece of apple with peanut butter and you're spiking to 140, that's completely different. So, taking into account the meal content and how much your glucose is changing is important. During the holidays, people often eat a little bit more variable than they usually with their regular schedule, and so
They're more great.
obviously we know yeah, so we know that that's something that people do, and that's great. We want you to enjoy your holidays. So it's just more about the repetition, right? Like you just want spiking at over 140 3 times a day is not what we want. But spiking over because you had a birthday cake, because it's your birthday once a year is a different story.
So you're looking at the patterns
We're
most.
looking at the patterns, yes, and the trends. And so that's another reason why I think having that RD support, that dietitian support is so imperative, because the RDs are trained to see these trends, are trained to see these patterns and pick it out and help you understand it and what's important, what's not, how can we intervene when needed.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing service that comes with it, and you can message them and they'll answer really quickly. And I found it really cool because, um, it's a huge value add. You're not just getting it by yourself and just looking at like, oh, what does this mean? I have no idea. You're getting like somebody you can bounce questions off of, and it's really cool. So tell everyone how they can get the device. And um, if you use my code grassfed girl, you will save on your device. You'll save $25 off your device. So make sure and use my code grassfed girl. I'll put that down in the description box too. But tell everyone where they can get it and how they can get the service.
Absolutely. So you can find us at www.nutrisense.io, and then right on the website page, you can see you can start your program. You can start filling out the questionnaire and pick the different programs that we have. Currently, we have 3 different programs where you can do a monthly subscription where there's no you can cancel at any time. At every month you can cancel, or there's 3 months subscription, 6 months, and 12 months. So lots of different options for you to choose from on our website. And yeah, check it out, see what works best for you, and you won't regret it.
Well, thank you so much, Sherry, for coming on. I'm sure everybody learned a lot about CGMs, and it's just such an amazing tool if you're into biohacking or you're just interested. Maybe you have diabetes running in your family, which most of us do. So you want to get this and see how you're doing. And it's just an amazing piece of biohacking. So thanks so much for coming on, Sherry. We really appreciate it. Please like, subscribe, share this video with a friend. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.